Welcome and good evening. Thank you for joining us as we begin our Defining Digital Destiny with Arlington and Sean Dubravac. Arlingtonians have a long history of being involved in defining the future of the community. In fact, I was at the 100-year anniversary of the Civic Federation this spring. As we plan forward, we need you on this part of the journey as well. It's not about planning the plan, it's about planning a discussion that will dialogue how Arlingtonians see themselves and see the world where they live, work, and play. The stakes are high. There are new opportunities that are being created faster than we can keep up. In fact, in 60 Minutes this past weekend, there was a conversation about artificial intelligence, the benefits, Watson as a supercomputer, and how it can provide diagnosis and cancer patients, as well as some risky things. Well, who makes the ethical decision about a driverless car? Is it Congress or is it tech companies? We have to be part of this conversation. Tonight, we'll set the stage for future discussions that are relevant right now. We want to talk about areas that will impact us: mobility, place, wellness, learning, and livelihood. In order to share our experience, we're streaming this live. We have a YouTube chat feature that anybody who is not present can also participate in the conversation. In addition, we have a Twitter handle, hashtag ARL Digital Destiny, if anybody wants to ask questions, either at home or in the audience. As members of this audience, you are agreeing to be part of this being videotaped. And we hope that people will ask questions, so this is an engagement for us. We have several distinguished guests in the audience. We have Senator Mary Margaret Whipple, as well as John Vistad, and Libby Garvey. Ms. Garvey has had the recent experience of hosting her own author talk, so she's very familiar. And we appreciate Ms. Garvey's opportunity to be here and introduce Sean Dubravac. So Ms. Garvey, who is the county board chair, has also served as chair of the school board, and we're very honored to have her. With that, I welcome Ms. Garvey.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to be a little bit late. We're over here? Okay. This is my hood, and I've never had problems finding parking in my favorite parking space, but I did. So thank you. I think you introduced John, who was here. Is John Vistad? There he is. And we have Victor Hoskins. Did you introduce everybody? And Ruben Varghese, did you make those introductions? Not yet? Did she make those introductions? No? Ruben, it's very nice to see you. Thank you. Did you? Yes, all right. Mary Margaret Whipple, Senator Mary Margaret Whipple is here, and her husband Tom, very, very big into digital issues. You are coming to a community that really is big on this. We're really glad to have you here. So thank you so much for coming. And Jack Brown, our emergency manager, is here with some of his department. Jim Schwartz, deputy manager. Wow, we've got quite a lot of people here. Again, I apologize for being late. I have a few things that I'm supposed to say. So let me check and see what those are. One of them, not surprising, Arlington, we've long prided ourselves being visionary in this area. Senator Mary Margaret Whipple was on the county board at one point and helped kind of get us to where we are today. Thank you so very much. And you know, there's no doubt that at this day and age, technology is really important. And I am looking forward to the discussion tonight because one of the things that I read in one of the write-ups, I have not read your book, I apologize, but I'm hoping to learn a lot tonight, was that you think we won't need cities anymore. And one of the things we pride ourselves here in is that we are a digital community city, and we're planning on attracting more people here. So that I'm going to be interested to hear how that all works out, because even though you know these devices change us in a lot of different ways, we're still people. And people need to be social, so I'm thinking we all still need to gather together, so I'm going to be listening to that for those points, and that's really great. And I think also we need to be thinking about, which I think we all are, so what are we going to look like in 20 years, 40 years, 60 years? That's some of our job here. And I think with no further ado, I'm going to stop here. Thank everybody for coming, our staff, our leaders in this community, thank you for being here. And I'm going to be fascinated with the discussion. Thank you. Can't wait to hear it. Okay, thank you.
I appreciate that. So with that, we have a microphone because we are going to be streaming it live. So if you have a question, I will need to have you hold the microphone so that everyone hear you, not in the audience, but outside. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jack Belcher, our Chief Information Officer, and Alexandra Fox, Business Librarian. Thank you very much.
So Dr. Sean Dubravac is Chief Economist and Director of Research at the Consumer Technology Association, an Arlington-based U.S. trade association representing more than 2,000 consumer tech companies. CTA owns and produces CES, the world's largest gathering place for all who thrive on the business of consumer technologies. In his role, Dr. Dubravak provides crucial economic analysis to association and industry leaders. He is also a highly regarded futurist who writes frequently on technology trends underpinning diverse industries. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Digital Destiny: How the New Age of Data Will Transform the Way We Work, Live, and Communicate, which explores how the world's mass adoption of digital technologies portends the beginning of a new era for humanity in the realms of economics, health, travel, and culture. We are privileged to have Dr. Dubravak here this evening. Thank you.
I'll start off, Sean. Thank you so much for being here. Sean has been a loyal supporter, and we didn't know each other beforehand.
That's right.
And I reached out to Sean and asked if we could get his support, and you've been there, as your company has for Arlington, so thank you so much. So let's start off talking about your book and your thoughts. You say we're on the eve of a revolution like we've never seen before. And you look back to 1450, and you talk about Johannes Gutenberg inventing the printing press, and you said that's going to outpace that. You talk about Thomas Edison inventing a light bulb, but you said light bulb really didn't mean much until he put a power plant in to power those light bulbs. And so here we are, it's 2016, and you're saying that we're going to have some sort of revolution taking place that's going to impact just about all aspects of our life, especially here in Arlington County. And I'm going to leave you to this one saying you say, and I'm going to see what your reaction to all of that is, and if you could give us a background on it. You say, we're drowning in data, but starving for wisdom.
Yeah, well, so with that, Jack, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm humbled to be here. It's wonderful to support what Arlington is doing. As you mentioned, we've been a long-time resident of Arlington, and we're very proud to be in Arlington. And I think Arlington is extremely well positioned to be a leader in this revolution that's taking place. One of the things that's happening is that you have a number of very diverse forces coming together at the same time. And these have been forces that have been building for a very long time. First digital computer, the ABC, we get in 1942. The first hard drive, we get in 1956. So we've been putting these building blocks together for a very, very long time, but it's just now that everything is starting to come to fruition. It really wasn't until the 80s that home computing became ubiquitous. It wasn't until the 90s where we really started to think about storage being ubiquitous. So it took 40, 50 years of that technology being in the marketplace to really start to grab hold. As late as 2000, as a country, only about 3% of us are on broadband connectivity. Only about 40% of us have home computers. So when you think about all of the change that has taken place over the last 60 years, 70 years, most of it has taken place in the last 15 years. And so it's all of these forces coming together now. Connectivity, it's the broad digitization of devices. 1980, we get the CD player, which is really the first consumer-facing digital product to see mass market appeal and be mass market adopted. And then it would be another 20 years, 1998, that we see digital televisions introduced. But then, in quick succession, we began to replace all of these analog products with their digital counterparts. 2001, we get the original iPod. 2003, we get smartphones. 2007, we get the original iPhone. And so quickly, one after another, we start to see all of these analog products, which we had lived with happily for 50, 60 years, be replaced with digital parts. At the same time, we start to embed sensors into them. So prior to 06, 07, we were using sensors for a number of different things. We were using things like accelerometers to deploy airbags in vehicles, but most of that was happening in the background. Consumers weren't seeing that as a forward-facing, consumer-facing technology. Then 2006, Nintendo introduced the Wiimote, which embedded accelerometers into the controller and allowed the user to digitize what they were doing in physical space and incorporate that into the game. Apple took that same accelerometer, added it to the original iPhone, And the original idea in 2007 was simply to change the orientation of the phone so that you could go from portrait to landscape and just switch it back and forth. And when Steve Jobs talked about that technology and demoed it with the original iPhone launch, it was all about changing the view that you had on that phone. Little did we know that other inventors and innovators would take that technology and apply it in a number of different innovative ways. And so where we are today is deploying a technology that was, at the time, relatively expensive. Each axis of motion capture in 2006, 2007 added about $7 per axis of motion capture. So for XY motion capture, being able to switch your phone from landscape to portrait added about $15 to the bill of materials. Today, the cost of that is pennies. And most manufacturers that I talk to don't even really think about the cost when they're building the products. And so they're just putting it into the technology, and we're seeing it show up in incredibly diverse places. Under Armour, earlier this year, released a pair of shoes that has embedded in them the exact same accelerometers that were in that original iPhone, that were in the Wiimote. And with it, we can use it to capture activity levels for the life of the shoe. Battery technology has improved enough. We still have a lot to go there, but it has improved enough that the technology outlasts the length of the shoe. You don't have to charge the technology. So it's waterproof. You can wash them. You can do other things like that. And so you see technology showing up in all of these places where it didn't exist before. There was already information there. It just wasn't being captured in a systematic, dynamic, continuous way. So if you wanted to measure the number of steps you took, you had to do so in a very rudimentary way. You had to do so in an analog way. You would have had to carry around a piece of paper with you or do it some other way. But because we can now capture it digitally, we can do it in continuous time. We can capture information that was already there but was difficult to garner. And then we can start to redeploy that information in very productive applications. So that's where we are, and that gets to the heart of the quote that you started with, Jack, that we are increasingly being inundated with information, and the next big step is to take all of that information and start to then garner intelligence from it. So for example, we can deploy cameras widely, we can measure activity levels widely, and so we can start to look at which city blocks in a city should be zoned for retail, which might be better zoned for residential. We might be able to look at how a city is being utilized by its residents and then suggest that maybe this would be a great place for a coffee shop or a restaurant because of the time of day that people are walking by it or the type of people that are walking by it. And so you can start to take scarce resources, and in an urban setting, real estate is an extremely scarce resource, and deploy it in the most productive way. And because you have the deployment of these sensors, you can then start to monitor that and measure that over time and redeploy these scarce resources as needed. And so you see that, that thought going into pretty much everything today. It's taking these scarce resources, figuring out what's the most productive application for those scarce resources, and then redeploying them. And that's at the heart of every technological movement we see today, whether it be self-driving cars, whether it be exploring how drones might be used. Everything that you see percolating on the surface is coming about because of these building blocks that have been in the works for 60 or 7 years, the confluence of all of those coming together at the same time, and the prices coming to the point where they become very inexpensive to deploy, so you can deploy them widely in non-traditional places, and then taking that information and making really interesting decisions based upon that information. And that will show up everywhere. I mean, if you look around your lives today, we still live very analog existences with the infusion of technology in a very limited way. And we are surrounded by information that exists in an analog physical world, but slowly, surely, we will begin to digitize all of that information and then utilize that information to make better informed decisions and to get stronger recommendations. And we can talk a lot about those type of things.
Just getting back to Ms. Garvey's point earlier, in your book you mentioned technology wants what life wants, and you have mentioned how this impacts the human experience. Can you expand on that a little further?
Yeah, so I think if we look at the way I was approaching it was that data and information is this living organism that wants to be utilized. It wants to be deployed, and it wants to be free, and it really wants to be able to influence that environment, just like a human would want to be heard and want to influence their environment. We see the same thing happening with information and with data, and so the deployment of these tiny, inexpensive sensors today is enabling us to essentially free information locked previously in these this physical existence. And so, the next 15 years, I think, is really going to be defined by cataloging this information, thinking about how do we store it, how do we utilize it, and then starting to look for those underlying nuggets of information. And that will really happen when we start to blend data together. So, for example, my wearable might be able to tell me how stressed I am, how excited I am, how depressed I am. I might be able to tie that into something like my commute data. So Waze knows how long it took me to get here. And it knows a lot about where I drive in Arlington, how long it takes me, what time of day I go. It's getting quite good at predicting where I'm going because it pulls in other information now. It looks at my calendar and it sees information on my calendar, so it knows when I'm commuting home. So those bits of information taken together, my calendar, my commute data, my wearable that tells me how stressed I am, can then start to provide these more robust recommendations about, hey, Sean, we see that you're really stressed during your commute. We think today if you adjust your commute 3 minutes, you'll have a much more enjoyable commute. It looks like traffic's clearing along the routes that you like to take. And so wait 3 minutes and see how that improves your life. So we're going to start to use these data to get better recommendations that actually make us better, make us happier, help us to make more informed decisions. And then over time, we're going to allow those machines to make decisions on our behalf. And we're already seeing that technology show up in the marketplace. Earlier this year at CES, for example, Whirlpool launched a pair of washers and dryers that connect to the internet. And they also connect to Amazon Dash. So they monitor something as simple as the number of loads of laundry you do, and they order on your behalf laundry detergent when you start to run low.
So for those who may not know about Amazon Dash, it is a direct order button.
Yeah, so it's a direct order button, but you can also have the machines. So the idea would be that you would, and with some of the applications today, you would push that button. Mm-hmm. You can also imagine that Amazon speaks directly to a machine that's monitoring that and orders things on your behalf. So today, about 7% of orders of our consumer spending happens online. But if you think about machines starting to order things on our behalf, it could easily get to 40, 50%. Today, analysts mostly think it maybe doubles. Maybe it gets to 15, maybe it gets to 20%. You could easily imagine an environment where half of the purchases we make are happening online. That could be food delivery services, that could be machines ordering things on our behalf. And so when you start to think about that dynamic, it has massive ripple effect throughout the entire system. So, and I think that's one of the really important things to remember about digitization is it doesn't just impact what's happening in the digital world anymore. Mm-hmm. It also happens to impact what's happening in the physical world. Retail stores change because we can order things online. Now, it isn't just that we get to order them online. It's this huge ripple effect throughout the entire environment.
So we're government, and we deal in predictability, low risk. And you're talking about a world where there's going to be unpredictability and possible high risk. So what can government do about it? And you call this a digital destiny. So there's a sense of an inevitability about that, isn't that not?
Yes, so I think the title was definitely chosen to suggest that this is an inevitable future, that we are clearly moving into a world where The lines are blurring between our physical lives that we live in, the physical world we live in, and the digital world in which we interact in. And some of the terms that we have historically used have become archaic. We used to talk about going online because it was an activity that we did. And then we also went offline. We left what was ever happening. We had very separate identities. Our online identity was separate from our physical identity. There's a classic New Yorker cartoon where there's a bunch of dogs and they say, you can't tell that I'm a dog on the internet. But no longer is that really true because those worlds are blurring and blending so much that we toggle seamlessly between them. And so there is no more this sense of going online, coming offline. They're blurring and they're blending very, very quickly. And I think we drastically today underestimate the impact it will have because we tend to think about things multiplying from where they are today, but we don't think about exponential growth from where they are today. So we think about, okay, imagine a city environment that has, rather than 1,000 cameras, 10,000 cameras, 100,000 cameras, but it's hard to fathom an environment that has millions of cameras. And what do we do with that amount of information? And what are the type of things that we can start to do?
So the pace of change is, you talk about in your book, it's not linear anymore. It's exponential. And you talk about something called Moore's Law. And if you could just talk a little bit about that, just frame the discussion, what that means.
Yeah, sure. So Moore's Law is essentially the laws that govern how quickly chip processing powers can get. And it goes back a number of decades to the number of transistors that could fit on a microprocessor. And there's a great story that looks at a chessboard. And the guy who invented chess, so the story goes, was an inventor in India many decades ago, centuries ago. And so he goes to the king, and the king loves chess so much that he wants to reward him for inventing this game. And so he says, well, just pay me a grain of rice on the first square and double it with each subsequent square. And so the king thinks he's got this great bargain, so he begins to pay out the rice, but he sees how quickly it begins to multiply, especially when you get to the back half of the chessboard. So when the king quickly realizes he can't pay this, he then, as the story goes, kills the inventor of chess. That's right. So be careful what you ask for, I guess, is the. But we are clearly in the back half of that chessboard where exponential growth is taking hold, and the growth that's happening just on the next square in this chessboard, in this advancement, outweighs all of the development that we have seen in the first half of the chessboard. Take, for example, something very simple like the ability of computers to recognize verbal commands. We are quickly moving into a world of verbal computing. So the way we measure the accuracy of verbal computing was something called the word error rate. And the word error rate essentially is how many words does the computer get right, how many does it get wrong. It was really first introduced about 1995. Microsoft was one of the pioneers in that space. Word error rate in 1995 is 100%. I mean, it can't understand anything that's being spoken. The word error rate is very, very high. By 2013, it's about 25%. So we make pretty good progress from 1995 to 2013. In the next 36 months, we go from about 25% word error rate, so 1 out of every 4 words coming back as an incorrect command, to about 3 to 4% word error rate where we are today. So all of the advancements in that technology over 30 years have taken place in the last 36 months. And that is true with a number of technologies, not just with vocal computing, but in a number of places. And so these things that we have been imagining or thinking about are now coming to fruition today because of the deployment of technologies. You look at something like a self-driving car, it's nothing more today than the cars we see on the road coupled with sensors and software. So it's taking parts that we are putting in our smartphones, that Nintendo put in the Wiimote, that we've used in all of these different places, and applying them to a bigger solution.
I want to take a second to ask a quick question. I don't know if anyone in the audience wants a question, but from I'm just curious. There's a lot of amazing things that are happening. Why is it important for Arlington to have this conversation right now?
So it is going to touch everybody's life. And I speak around the world to executives everywhere who think, this really isn't going to touch me. But it is such a pronounced impact that it will fundamentally change everything that we know and everything that we recognize. So it will change the type of decisions that we make. Where do I live? Where do I work? What type of work do I do? And I'm not so worried that it replaces us anytime soon. But we do see how technology has infused into the type of work that we already do. Most of us probably use smartphones to do our work. Most of us probably use computers. And because we use computers and because we use smartphones, we do different work than we would have done 30 years ago. And it has touched every job. And that will continue to happen. Already there are fast food restaurants in China that are run completely by robots. And so what does that mean for the people who used to work in a fast food restaurant? I don't think that means that we'll have fast food restaurants in the future that don't have people working in them, but I think they will do drastically different jobs. I think you could imagine that maybe these fast food restaurants, which are operated by robots, start to hire live bands to play at the restaurant. Or maybe they have concierge service, and so you have somebody who's walking around ensuring that there's this personal touch. So you start to move to this element of, I don't know what the right term is, but maybe non-digitized experiences. You see the same thing already playing out in industries that were hit by this revolution early on. So music was digitized, and that significantly impacted the traditional record labels. And you have some now, some bands have been successful at doing pay what you like paying, and in some instances, successful bands have garnered greater funds from that approach than from a traditional payment approach. And so it's changed the type of way that they're monetizing what they bring to the market. Things like live performances now have much higher ticket prices because it becomes a complement to what was digitized. And so it just completely starts to change everything that we know. And we can grab any example from any job in Arlington County, from any aspect of life in Arlington County, and see how that could possibly change in the decades to come as this digitization more fully engulfs every piece of our lives.
I think we have some questions, possibly.
We do. We have a question, and it's an interesting one because it talks a little bit about the environment and how you see data of Nest and Wink, and you think how is it going to affect the power usage, and is it going to change the adoption? So are we going to see a benefit in the community based on a wide adoption of tools such as Nest and Wink?
Yeah, so I think what you see early on is forces coming from multiple directions. So you have consumers self-selecting to digitize elements inside their home. My front door is digitized because I put a digital lock on it now. And so when I approach my door, it recognizes me from my phone and unlocks itself. On the rare occasion that I've gotten home and my phone's dead, and I go and I open my door and it's locked, I have to pause for a minute because I go, how do I get in my house? And then I realize I have these things in my pocket called keys that still will lock that door. But I use them so infrequently that I'm just so used to my phone doing this and it all interacting with me just simply existing. And so if you think about these different forces, on one element you have the consumer self-selecting to bring in these digital technologies. You have businesses and government working to bring in these technologies. Early on, I think the choices will be to look at these payback periods. So if the savings outweighs the cost of the device, then it makes a lot of sense. And that's why you've seen early adoption around thermostats and other things like that, because there's a clear payback period. You're able to save money from energy costs by implementing the technology. And then over time, we'll start to implement and add other technologies that may not have such a clearly defined payback period, but bring some other utility into our lives. So I think what you'll start to have happen is appliances will let us know the best time of day to run based upon energy prices, based upon other environmental elements. We'll start to deploy sensors more widely that measure air quality. Again, it all goes back to scarce resources and how do we take advantage of scarce resources. Everything in the environment, air quality, water, electricity, all of those at some level are scarce resources. Already we're seeing sprinkler systems connect to the internet. So I'm sure we have all had this experience where we're driving in a neighborhood and you see sprinkler systems going off in the middle of a rainstorm. And the reason they do that is because they're using analog technologies. They have a little plastic cup outside that fills up with water when it rains, and that then toggles the switch to turn on the sprinkler system. Well, if that cup hasn't filled up yet, then the sprinkler system will still turn on. I think in the future, you're already starting to see this technology implemented, but more widely in the future, what will happen is you'll be measuring things like soil, like the water in your soil, and does it even need water? Barcelona is already doing this in a lot of their parks, so that certainly will impact the cities. And I think you'll start to get questions like, hey, Sean, we see that a storm is approaching because we've got water sensors deployed throughout Arlington County. And we see that based upon what we're measuring, you're probably going to get about a 1/4 inch of rain. Do you want us to turn off your sprinkler systems today? And we'll be able to make those decisions. Cities will do it, communities will do it, consumers will do it, and that wide deployment will improve life and will improve those scarce resources significantly.
Thank you, Sean. So do we have any more questions?
For right now, let's go on and
Okay.
talk about some economic development topics I know we had.
So Jack, would you like to introduce?
Well, we're fortunate tonight to have Victor Hoskins, Director of Economic Development, here today. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity for you to talk a little bit about economic development and how you see this digital revolution affecting how we attract and retain the businesses we have in the community. And Victor, I thought it'd be a good opportunity for you to talk about what you're seeing from your perspective as well.
Yeah, so I think just having more information and have it more readily available will help businesses make more informed decisions. So I already gave the example of deployment of different retail space, what retail establishments might make sense in different retail environments. At the end of the day, the county wants businesses to be successful. Businesses want to be successful. And so incentives are all aligned, and that's a great story, and that's where digital information will come into play. So I think that's some of it, taking, again, these scarce resources, deploying them in the most effective way, helping businesses make wise decisions. Inventory management systems are going to change significantly. So if I take my inventory management system and I digitize it and I infuse it into the environment, a number of really interesting things will start to happen. I've seen prototypes, for example, of transparent LCD screens. So you might imagine that these transparent LCD screens would start to show up in your local convenience store. And so prices could be dynamically adjusted based upon the supply and demand of the products that you have, based upon the unique characteristics of that market. So you could have 7-Elevens that are 3 blocks apart, but have different products, have different prices because of the unique characteristics of those individual markets. And you could tie it to something like the delivery truck, so that the delivery truck is communicating with the store, and prices for things like eggs or milk or other products are declining as the truck backs up into the store and does its delivery. So you are selling out of these products just as your inventories are being replenished. Those inventory turns make businesses much more financially viable, improve their bottom line. And so all of these little types of things, what are very little things today, could mean the difference between success and failure.
So is it possible that we will be wealthier as a result?
Yeah, I think we will be wealthy along a number of metrics because consumers will be able to get the type of things that they want. They'll be able to make the type of decisions that they want. There'll obviously be trade-offs but those trade-offs will be much more well-informed.
So Victor, if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing. I mean, I know you've been taking the lead in innovation with Eastern Foundry, 1776. And talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the community.
Well, first of all, I want to say that CES has been a tremendous partner for us. We actually market at your events now in Las Vegas and in Shanghai, so thank you so much for your support. What we have been seeing is really what's going on right now is a transformation of the economy. Along with this digital revolution, the companies are evolving. I mean, what we're seeing, the companies that are growing rapidly are not the companies that were growing rapidly years ago. As a matter of fact, our stock and trade was government, and it was growing for us for years and years and years. In the last 10 years, there's been dramatic decline. As a matter of fact, we've had a net loss in government jobs, but we still have had a net gain in jobs. Why? Because we've had an explosion in our med tech, in our ed tech, in our big data analytics, in our cybersecurity, in our clean tech. I'll give you a quick example. Out of CEB a number of years ago came a small group of people who started a company called Evolent Health. And Evolent Health was started with like 4 or 5 people in Boston. They're now, I think, a couple of thousand across the country. And he just bought a company, a med tech company in Chicago for $285 million. That company was 4 people just like 6 or 7 years ago. That is the kind of transformation that's taking place, and it is dramatic. So those are the kind of businesses that we're trying to get next to and trying to help grow. And we meet at some of your technology shows.
Well, you could easily imagine that half the people who live in Arlington County in 50 years will be doing jobs that don't even exist today.
I want to interject. We actually have a question from, I think, Twitter about broadband access and how much some of this developments are dependent on high-speed broadband access.
Certainly, connectivity is a huge building block, and I know Jack could speak to things that Arlington County is doing and building that backbone for and infrastructure for the deployment of these technologies. Unless data is, if you will, unleashed, it doesn't have as much value. So you really gain the potential of this digitized information when you're able to mix it with other information and provide a fair dose of analytics to it. So just having that information residing locally provides some value. Being able to, in most instances today, we're sending it to the cloud. The analytics is taking place there, and then you're pushing back either the recommendations or the analysis to whatever service or device needs that information. And so being able to do that is certainly a key aspect of what this transformation will look like.
So one of the things I know Peter Diamandis talks about is that the number of stages in terms of disruption of innovation. And he said it starts off with digitalization, which you could say broadband is that. And he says you go through a phase, and that phase is deception, he calls it. Deception meaning that we really don't know, we're not aware that it's happening. And he quotes people like Kodak, who in 1975 invented the digital camera, but said, well, no one's going to use a digital camera, so we'll put that aside. And they went and they stayed with this same process of doing it. They are now out of business, and they're not working. And it's happened in so many. Clayton Christensen talks about the disruptions that have taken place. But Victor, you have to say, I mean, talking to that, there is really while that's there, that could be an asset that means immense value to the community. There's really not that awareness yet of the potential of that. Are we not in the deception phase, you think, at that point?
Well, Schumpeter, back in the 1920s and 30s, postulated that there is a creative destruction process. When jobs go away, there are the jobs created. And I think at that time he was looking at things like telegraph, like, how the telegraph started, then turned into telephone. I mean, these kinds of transitions from, cart and horse and buggy, you had a lot of blacksmiths, and then all of a sudden you have automobile repairmen. I mean, it's a very transitory and destructive process, but the key is the educational attainment of your working population at the level that can catch that transition. I think we all at one time or another are deceived about what's really going on. I mean, we think that that everything is fine in the economy, and then it all of a sudden blows up. I don't think anybody in 1998 thought the economy would blow up in the year 2000, and that was all based on data. These kind of false positives that you may get, and I think that it's that process of false positives, Kodak thinking that, oh, this is going to go on forever, that really kind of deceives us. The key is being observant about the trends, and I think that that's what that's what comes out of Digital Destiny. What are the trends? And if you follow the trends, you should be safe. If you have fear of the trends, you're probably going to find yourself where Kodak found itself.
What about related to, there's a question related to jobs. So what is our responsibility as Arlington County to consider with this displacement, and should we be doing anything for those individuals who might lose their jobs? Is there something we should be considering?
Well, one of the things that Arlington County has done better than a lot of communities in our country is educated the youth in an incredible way. In addition to that, it's really attracted some great universities. We have Virginia Tech here, we have George Mason University, we have Marymount University, we have George Washington University. Arlington has really taken a grip on the educational attainment. And if you look at the population of Arlington, darn it, the boomers are as smart as the millennials. It's pretty amazing. I mean, you see masters, bachelors, PhDs among the entire population. 70% of our population is well educated. And I think that's one of our incredible competitive advantages, and we have to keep that. But the key is, how do you link that directly to jobs? That's the part that no one has figured out, and that's what we are trying to figure out now. How do you link that educational attainment directly to jobs? You come out of graduate school, or you're in a cybersecurity program at Marymount University, and you're doing an internship at a cybersecurity company in Arlington County. I mean, that's the kind of linkage that we need to do for that transition.
So Victor, how can local government support this digital revolution? What do you think?
Well, fortunately, your local government has supported it. Our board has done a tremendous job, particularly in the last year and a half. We've done some very creative and innovative and far-reaching things in terms of business attraction. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard about us being able to bring in applied predictive technologies, which, actually expand them. They were already here. We actually have had some very fortunate luck in bringing in a Grant Thornton recently. Grant Thornton is going to bring over 1,300 jobs to the county. So we've had some very, very fortunate wins. It's just that we have to continue to be innovative and creative and reach down for those innovative companies.
Thank you.
So we're fortunate tonight. We have Cheryl Foyle here with us today. And Cheryl Foyle's with the Kidder Corporate Group, and she is an investor, and Arlington's an attractive place to invest in real estate. Can you talk a little bit about it, Cheryl?
In real estate?
And why is Arlington attractive to you to invest in?
Well, first of all, we're based here, and we've been here for a long time. We've got a lot of local ties. People talk a lot about why Arlington is great for, cybersecurity is a big one, big data, a lot of the things related to government, regulated industries, healthcare is another big one, education. One I don't hear a lot that's really true are actually some of our big private businesses. So we focus a lot in construction and real estate, which are incredibly important, especially to the topic of smart cities. And we have tons of large companies that are based here that are finally starting to innovate as data and technology is coming in. And so I'm really excited to see Arlington sort of rise up, along with all of DC really, when it comes to smart city technology in general.
And Sean, you talk about that, about retail, the revolution, disruption taking place in the whole area of retail, of where you live, how you live. I mean, the whole question of Airbnb, what's happening with that, what that means. And I'd be interested in your thoughts in terms of what Cheryl's saying and why that's an attraction and how we might position ourselves to.
I mean, the flow of people start to change when you digitize every element in their life. And we can talk about self-driving vehicles and what that starts to do to an urban setting where you no longer have to park. The utilization rates of cars are around 4 to 5%. The utilization of self-driving cars are expected to be around 95%. So all of a sudden, you fundamentally change everything about that experience. When you no longer put a steering wheel in a vehicle, you don't put a gas pedal or a brake pedal, then you can start to customize the interior of that any way you want. You could put a desk, you could put a bed, you could put a hot tub, you could do anything that you wanted to. And it also means that you may decide you live somewhere else than you work, or you may decide you start to make these other decisions based upon this element of your life becoming digitized. And so, as we see self-driving cars, and self-driving cars are right around the corner. We're a few years away from seeing their deployment. They'll probably start in the fleets. So you'll start to see them with Uber, you'll start to see them with Lyft. Already you've got Uber doing tests in Pittsburgh. So when you see that deployment starting in 5 or 6 years, that will mostly have an impact initially in those urban settings, and it will happen very, very quickly.
So to follow up on that, I mean, you talk about scarcity and abundance. One of the things we have now is the scarcity of is land, open land. And the concern is we talked the other day in our management team about we have the need to store things, parts, and we need to put trucks someplace. And where do you find that land? And you can't. And I guess given what's happening, is there something we should be watching, looking for from the perspective of these driverless vehicles and the change in technology in terms of maybe leveraging that abundance to address the scarcity problem we have with space?
Yeah, I think that will definitely be something that these technologies will start to address. I mean, again, it goes to those scarce resources and tackling those problems. And so you could imagine a number of different scenarios. You don't need a lot of parking garages when cars never park. But you will need charging stations because most likely they'll be electric vehicles. You might need places where you're swapping out the batteries. The batteries take a certain amount of time to charge, but that doesn't mean you couldn't swap the batteries out so that vehicle can continue to go.
That's gas stations, I imagine.
That's right. You may not need gas stations. I mean, we're going to get further out when we start to remove those type of places. And maybe in some instances, you're replacing gas stations for a place where the batteries are swapped out. But overall, you start to change what that landscape looks like. The other piece is we're definitely, as a world, becoming increasingly urbanized. You see it happening in China. You see it happening in the United States. It wasn't that long ago where well over half of the population in the United States lived in rural settings, and that's no longer the case. We're moving to urban settings, and so places like Arlington will increasingly become urbanized. Those scarce resources will become even more scarce in those settings, and so you'll see drastic change as a result of that. Digitization, sensorization, technology will step in to try to solve those and to address those issues.
I think this is related to something Cheryl said in a previous Digital Destiny video. Can you explain the concept of liquid as it relates to space to the audience so they understand? I think it's a really valid point.
Sure. So, the way things have always worked in the past, you had a piece of land and it was meant to be used for just one thing, and that was what it was for. But we're getting to a place where now we can dynamically in real time figure out who's supposed to be where and using what, right? And that's great because that's really the way that life works. It's chaotic, right? For a while you're living by yourself, and then you're living with 2 people, and then you might have 4 people. Or you want to run a business from the same spot that where you live, which is the way that things used to be a while ago until we had permits and all sorts of things. And so we're getting to this era where technology is helping us reallocate space, and it's allowing people to sort of like real life to adapt to the crazy, chaotic way that our lives really are. So in Arlington, for example, we actually have a We Live, which is a place where you can go and live month to month. And that's pretty new and that's exciting. And now I'm even seeing pitch concepts for things like bunk beds that you can just rent, and you can live in any city you want, and you pay a flat fee. So people are now saying, do I even need a place to live? Is a home right, or were we just doing it because logistically that was the only way we knew how to live up until this point? Another thing I wanted to mention that goes back to urbanization is, we keep talking about scarcity and it sounds very negative, but urban planning is about to be revolutionized. I mean, right now your spending habits, where you like to eat, where you live, is all available, but just in these massive silos. At this point, if you live in a city, the restaurant near you, it was probably picked because someone walked up to the person who owned that piece of land and said, I want that restaurant there. But now we could actually figure out there's supposed to be a Thai restaurant there, right? Or that Target should really be 2 blocks further, and that's going to also give us space and hopefully everybody a better life and higher economic utilization within an urban environment.
And at the end of the day, residents in that environment are made better off as well because they're getting the services that they would naturally gravitate towards.
There's a challenge here, I imagine. I mean, there's a generational challenge. I mean, renting a bunk bed is not something is not a top
You should try it, Jack. Maybe you just haven't tried it yet.
I haven't tried it.
Never too late to try it.
But isn't that, and it goes back to the communication issues. I mean, communicating to the millennials about what, and you're a millennial, right? And talking about what your interests are and what you're trying to achieve And we sort of miss it, and technologists. I remember we were at a meeting, Victor and I were at a meeting with head of Veneto, Mitchell Scheer, not too long ago. And he said there's really a problem in communication between the technologist and the urbanist. They talk in different languages. They're saying the same thing, but no one understands what the other's saying. So it's like ships passing in the night. Did you see that happening? Is that something we need to pay attention to from a government perspective in terms of how do we reach and talk the language of, say, the millennials? Or am I just being, just me doesn't want to sleep in someone else's bunk bed?
I think you raised, I don't actually want to live in a bunk bed either. I didn't mean to sound too excited, but it was just cool to me that someone was thinking, well, I don't even know if I need this the way that life used to be, right? Maybe I don't even need that, right? And it's natural because now people think, well, maybe I don't even need a car, right? And what else won't we need soon? In terms of the role of government, I actually think one of the biggest things that will help everybody is this continued work on the silos of data to make things more available. Because to Sean's earlier point, the more data that we have and the more that's contextualized and shared between groups, the more we're going to be able to objectively figure out what everybody wants. And that's naturally objective, right? And then we don't have to be so anxious about what this group wants versus that group wants, because we're actually going to know the right thing there is supposed to be a target. It doesn't matter that the millennials are complaining on Twitter.
So I think one thing that we don't talk a lot about, but something I've been thinking a lot about over the last year, is how this starts to change who we are as people. So this book, Digital Destiny, really talks a lot about what the future starts to look like, how it changes the way we work, the way we live, the way we interact. But the next change after that is changing our culture, changing our societies, adjusting the way that we have lived for a very long time. Now, that may take a very long time to come to fruition. That may take 100 years. That may take multiple generations. But I do think over time, digitization is changing who we are and the way we live our lives. And there's little examples that tend to be percolating up. So, most of you think about something as simple as a candy, right? Gummy bears. Gummy bears are a candy that's modeled after a physical object that we see in the world. Bears, maybe it's a soda bottle. I've seen those too. That's what I grew up with. I was at a Five and Dime that's been around for 60 years, and I walked to their candy aisle. They still sell bulk candy, and they had a box of emoji candy. So it was candy modeled after these digital icons that we use in text. So I bought a box, and I took it home, and my kids were like, oh, emoji candy. They were so excited for it because the world they live in is highly digitized, and it blurs and blends into their existence seamlessly. And so we see what we do in the physical world, something as simple as candy today, being changed and altered because of what's happening in the digital world. I think in the future that will become much more pronounced. Everything we know about our society and our culture will start to be influenced by digitization.
You talk about retail, and you talk about retail at different times. But retail is going through a transformation, is it not? In terms of how we look at going and shopping for clothes and doing things. Could you talk, either of you talk or both of you talk about that?
Well, I know one of the big trends right now is showrooms. If you haven't seen them yet, they're starting to open up in a lot of areas here where you can go and physically observe items, but you can't actually buy them there. And there are some tax benefits to that, which is also another problem that I think we're all dealing with at the moment. But you may want to order it online instead. And we're also seeing the opposite trend, which is people are looking online and then going to the store if they want to have it immediately, right? And it's sort of funny that it's sort of these two divisive trends, and it goes back to inefficiency. Like ideally you already know exactly what it is because you can perfectly experience, and then poof, it suddenly appears right next to you, right? And I think that we're getting closer and closer to that, and as we start to get tools like virtual reality, for example, people are saying, well, maybe I don't even need to see a house before I buy it, and honestly, we're still a long way off from that being true, but people are already starting to figure out and how to use that to say, well, I don't need to see that house because I saw enough pictures of it, or I saw it online, and people are doing the same thing for retail right now.
Every bunk bed's the same, so you don't really.
That's right.
In the future, we won't need to see the houses. Every bunk bed will be the same.
We have a couple of relevant questions coming from Twitter that I'd like to ask. So that one of the questions is about, we have a diverse population, not only from, millennials and baby boomers, but from an economic perspective. And how are we making sure that, the retail's not just addressing the haves, but the have-nots? And is there anything that we can do to promote digital inclusion and literacy for all of Arlington?
So I think this is very important, and I think that today's tech companies think a lot about this. When I talk to the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, they think about this a tremendous amount, and they pour a tremendous amount of resources into their services to ensure that they are readily available to every constituent of a community, regardless of any of these, metrics, whether it be income, education, gender, race. And you see that already in the way they deploy the services. They're working on refining that. So you order an Uber today, and the driver doesn't see what your race is, what your income levels are. And so you've already seen success come from these type of platforms because you're getting drivers and ultimately vehicles into neighborhoods that might not have been frequented by other modes of transportation. And that will only become stronger and reinforced as we move into a more fully digitized environment. And so you're seeing Uber think a lot about that, for example, with their self-driving cars as they begin to roll those out into multiple markets. How do we ensure that this is available to every constituent of a community? And how do we ensure that it serves those in need, not just those that have the financial resources?
So then another semi-relevant question, especially to the Uber conversations, what role should government be playing to make sure that our citizens are not adversely impacted?
So I think first and foremost, governments need to foster an innovative environment, and they need to ensure that they don't pigeonhole innovations based upon what they perceive that innovation to address. Because so often we have seen innovations that transform an entire market, though they never intended to transform that market. When Steve Jobs stood up and introduced the original iPhone in 2007, he didn't mention that it was a camera at all. He didn't talk about the camera at all. He talked about it being three things, none of which was a camera. But if you look at today, how that technology not only transformed the mobile internet experience we have, the way we communicate, but it also transformed digital imagery and the way we think about photos and the way, that is a big element of how we communicate today, whether it's Instagram, Snapchat, or other things. We actually use those things that we still call telephones very rarely for telephony. We make very few calls on those devices. We primarily use them to communicate in other ways. And so had policy been implemented in 2007 that limited camera functionality on that device, it would have significantly altered the present that we live in today. I think it's very important that policy take that into account, that they're not able to offer prescriptions that can foresee the potential positive uses of some of these technologies.
I'd like to add to that too. I think another big thing for government is continuing to push ahead engineering and coding is something that everybody needs to do, and that it's common literacy. You're either building the future or you're going to be living in somebody else's, and it's prevalent all the time. Even at CES this year, there was this awesome haptic feedback suit, and there was only one model, and it was kind of meant for an average-sized guy, so I didn't get to use it, right? And obviously, it was very expensive, and they could only have one prototype. But the point is, if we're not all building the future, it's going to look and feel like it's made for somebody else, and that's something where it really starts in public education.
I heard actually a quote recently, it's learn to code or get coded.
Yeah,
Which I thought was a very interesting quote. So, thank you, Cheryl. So do we have any more questions, or can we move to our third sector?
Let's move on to our third for right now.
Okay, so would you
Well,
like to?
before we lift that, I think that's an interesting subject you bring up, Sean, and that's there used to be a division between your private life and your public life. And what the phone has done, the smartphone has done, is really blur that distinction. And now a public life, private life are one and the same. And there's all kinds of security and privacy issues surrounding all of this. There was a show on 60 Minutes was on the other night, and Charlie Rose was talking about all the great things that are happening in medicine. We'll talk about that in a minute with the Watson computer and how it can take you and compare you against people who have the same body makeup and then be able to term of treatments. But it also talked about something scary, which is that we are really deferring the discussion, the policy discussion about privacy and security to the big companies, the Amazons, the Ciscos, the Microsofts, and they're having these discussions. And frankly, they're telling us, don't worry, it'll be fine. And we saw the other day, the end of the show, they had a human-looking robot. And I don't know if you had seen the show. And very pretty woman, but a robot. And Charlie Rose asked, he said, what's your goal in life? And she looked at him and said, to be smarter than you. Yeah. And Ray Kurzweil says that that's not too far in the future, and that's going to happen. So is it responsibility to have discussions like this here and other places that talk about, while it's good, it all seems to be great, but there is a dark side, is there not, to all of this?
So at the end of the day, despite the fact that the digitization of our environments is an inevitability, we are still in control of our destiny. And I think we get to control a lot of that destiny and how we deploy technologies and how we use technologies. And so I don't want to emphasize, or underemphasize the point that humans are still going to play a vital role in the world that we live in the future. And it's important for us to take active roles in that discussion. When I talk with companies, security, privacy are topics they think a lot about, they talk a lot about, they're extremely concerned about. And often, in almost every single case, they view whatever underlying information is gathered and digitized as the proprietary information of the individual. So they're not thinking about that information as their information. They're thinking about it as the information of the individual user. They're trying to empower the environment in that system so that the individual user can take that information and utilize it in other settings. You see that one of the areas that has probably been digitized most heavily thus far is around health and fitness and personal activity levels. And you can see today how easy it is for end users and consumers to share that information across different devices, and across different apps, so that they can really get a full picture. I have a bathroom scale that's connected to the internet. I have wearables that I wear. I have apps that I use that monitor how much I'm eating. All of those are speaking to each other. And so the second I step on that scale, it communicates that information to the app that's measuring how much I'm eating. Every time I go for a walk or a run or a bike ride, it takes all of that information and communicates it to the app that's looking at this broad picture of my active life. And so while those are each individual apps and services and hardware, they're allowing me to control that experience. And so I think what companies are trying to balance is security and privacy, while at the end of the day making the consumer the one who controls that proprietary information and can utilize that proprietary information to empower all of these services.
And become educated in the process.
Yes, definitely.
Exactly.
So we're fortunate today to have Dr. Ruben Verghese, who's our Director of Public Health. Dr. Verghese, we're pleased to have you here today. And you talk a lot about the change that's probably going to disrupt. The one area of the industry that hasn't been disrupted for hundreds of years is the medical profession. And there's a disruption coming. I was down in Colombia, South America, with a group of resident students from Tulane University, doctors who were going in. And I talked a little bit about this, and they had no clue. I said, no, it's the same. We're going through medical school now. It's all going to be the same. But Sean, you point out that there's a change coming.
Definitely. Yeah, we're seeing a massive democratization of healthcare. It's happening slowly, where consumers are increasingly getting access to their proprietary health information, and they're able to make decisions and be better informed than ever before. Take something as simple, I've talked about bathroom scales, take something as simple as your own weight. I mean, this used to be something that we went to a doctor to get. People didn't have bathroom scales 50 years ago, 60 years ago. It was very uncommon to have access to that information on a daily basis or however frequently you wanted to measure it. Now we can step on a scale and we can share that information with a host of individuals if we wanted to. We could have medical professionals look at that. We could have family members look at that. We could post it daily to Facebook if we wanted to. You know, I don't want to share that information with anybody. But so that's just one example of something that has become completely democratized. And no longer is that information that's only available at a hospital or through a doctor. And you're seeing that happen in a number of places. So it isn't just with your weight. The internet has empowered us with information. Now sensors are enabling us to get more exact measurements. I just today reviewed the submissions for CES's Innovation Awards. And what is happening in healthcare is phenomenal. I can't talk about any of those yet, but what is being democratized just in the next 6 months, things that will be released at CES in January of 2017 are phenomenal. Things that we today go and see doctors for will be available in our homes at our leisure in 6 months. It's incredible.
Your thoughts?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I wanted to go back to the quote that you really started this with, drowning in data but starving for wisdom. I agree that data is important, and I think that the acceleration of the amount of data is tremendous. What healthcare and the clientele will probably need is how to make sense of that data, okay? So I'm all for the data expansion, but the concern that I've had as a healthcare provider is sense making, because it's data, it's not information until we make sense of it. And the internet is full of information, but is it contextualized for the individual? It's not to suggest that doctors are the only people, or nurses, or healthcare providers. However, in our society, we've provided that structure. So we've got to find a way to democratize that sense-making. And the problem is, it's not that easy to do, because a lot of diseases and conditions take years to develop. So what do you do to help people have that access? We have human structures in the U.S. that are compared to other countries that practice medicine differently. So those are going to be the challenges, because you've got a number of people who don't understand some of the healthcare tools out there. How do you make sure that they have the right information to make the best decision for them? So some of the examples about if we're going to give people access to customized medications or to x-rays, our structure as a nation has to change, because those rules are at a governmental structural level where, because of past concerns about would people have access to charlatans versus good medical information, how are we going to put those two together? So I think I'm very excited about the increase in data. What I'm hoping is also that there will be a push from the same individuals to actually help with sense making, because I think that's part of that, and goes back to some of the discussions earlier. A lot of this is about relationships and dialogue. We have to talk about what we as a group make sense of the health data and what to do with it, because unfortunately, in my experience, both when I was in clinical practice and now in public health on a population level, behavior change is not as easy to encourage. I mean, I realized how powerful cigarettes were as a behavior when a person who's had a massive heart attack and has had 2 bypass surgeries still won't be able to quit. So what we need to be able to do is take the data and figure out a way to then have the dialogues, and this is where I was going to go, that I think the role of government probably at all levels is to help with some of that dialoguing and sense-making as a community. What can we do to know how to make sense of that information and help people make the best decisions for themselves? Because in the end, that I think is what we need to do. And we'll have to tackle the privacy issues, ownership issues, and security issues that health data really it needs to be addressed. Because I think, just like with some of the national security issues, we have not seen a robust response to giving up privacy rights. In fact, I think it's actually raised the concern of how to assure it, and I want it to be an and discussion, not an or.
And I don't think it's just consumers that will gain access to information. We look at the way AI, artificial intelligence, is developing and vocal computing is developing. You're seeing early tests around Watson, and can it help doctors become more informed? And so one of the things that it can do is bring to the attention of the doctor new journal articles that have come out that they might not have been aware of. And so the professional, the medical professional, I don't think goes away in this equation. In fact, I think they become much stronger because they become better informed. They're less reliant upon their own history, their own experience, and that's, you know, a lot of what we do today is, hey, how bad does it hurt? 1 to 10, you know, and so that some of that becomes more precise, and the doctor can use that information to make more informed decisions. They become incredibly more educated and incredibly more aware of all of the research that is out there and everything else that's available to them. So across the board, you're going to see a tremendous amount of change.
So, and just help me understand, so is it possible that I can wear a device that will monitor multiple things, data points, and it will send it to my physician prior to my appointment, for example, to inform my physician beforehand? Or
I don't see a reason why it
That could be
can't
helpful.
happen. In fact, I would
Could be
hope that it
helpful.
can. We have to encourage people to be comfortable with it. And, you know, for the consumer, it's probably going to be the privacy issue. For the provider, they're going to want to know the reliability of the information.
That's very
Is it, you know, a monkey behind some machine, or has it done, from an FDA standard, I mean, kind of
Oh,
a reliability, validity of the data. I mean,
very
it's funny in one sense, and yet to
Yeah.
make the decisions, because actually to
point.
democratize things, it would even be better to be able to have some of your lab work done before, but our traditional culture is where you have to get it ordered by your doctor, and most people won't do it ahead of time, they'll do it when you're at the office. So those are some of the decisions that are going to have to be made,
Right.
because if we could do that, you'd have more information, but yet at the same time, data can scare some folks, and they've made some decisions. I mean, there's a reason why HIV results, for example, were not allowed to be done in the routine way. You got the results in the office because people could actually interpret it wrong and jump to a conclusion that they've got something going on. So we've got to figure out a way to democratize and keep it safe.
and balance it, yeah.
Yeah, and there's lots of places this is showing up. So AT&T a couple of years ago at CES launched a top for a regular pill bottle. They call it the Glow Cap, and it connects to the internet. And so it records every time it's opened, and importantly records when it's not opened. So it can send you a text message, it could call you, it could call a loved one, a medical professional, and alert them that you haven't taken your medicine today. So one of the big issues is people get a prescription, but then don't take the medicine. So something like this could alert the medical professional again, or even just the individual, that they haven't taken their medicine. They can then go take their medicine. And so it becomes reinforcing of the prescription that the doctor gave, or the discharge orders that the hospital issued, become self-reinforcing when digitization is added and enabled.
So it's
This
another
could be-
example. Go ahead.
This could be very useful for monitoring elderly parents and and the frequency by which they take their medications, yeah.
Definitely. And I've got a mom who's aging now, but aging in place and doesn't want to go live with any of us or live anywhere else. And one of the things that I can do is monitor her activity levels and look for deviations. All I have to do is pick up for a deviation. So my mom is the last person in the world who would call me and say, hey, I had a bad fall and I'm hurt. But if I can see that she's normally walking 10,000 steps a day, and now all of a sudden she's not walking 10,000 steps a day, and it looks like she's sleeping longer than she used to, and I can then check in on her and say, hey, what happened here? What's going on? And with that information, I can get her help or support quicker, earlier, and so all of these things become preventative. But it is a game changer across the board. So one of the things we've seen at CES, for example, is connected toothbrushes. So the question is, do I really need a connected toothbrush? I don't know. This is the experiment we're in right now. Does it really matter that my toothbrush is connected to the internet? But if it does, then it fundamentally changes the role that the dentist plays. The dentist of the future could easily become a data scientist first and a dentist second. So they may want to take a look at your information. How long are you brushing your teeth? What days are you brushing your teeth on? And they can start to ascertain information about you that you may not even been aware of. Hey, Sean, we see you're not brushing your teeth on Tuesdays. What's going on Tuesdays? How can we help you with this. Or we notice you're not really brushing this side of your mouth, or you're not doing this. So all of a sudden that information, which was already there, again, this is information that has long existed, but wasn't readily available to us, can be digitized, and then you get that feedback into the system. In this case, it's just brushing your teeth, something as simple as that. But that feedback into that system improves the quality. And so the role of the dentist, if that's something we actually decide to adopt, could fundamentally change in the future.
I just wanted to add to that, because we keep talking about, like, a new device comes out and there's one kind of data, like that cap. It's really interesting, but it's scary because it might be wrong on its own. But what's really exciting is that everything's starting to talk to each other. And the same reason that you have eyes and you have ears and you have a sense of smell is because sometimes one stream of data is not enough to tell reality. Sometimes your own experience isn't enough, and you talk to other people and say, well, what did that look like to you? Right? And part of the revolution that's about to happen is that machines and different kinds of sensors are also starting to be able to talk to each other and contextualize. And that helps make things, it helps make things really reliable in the same way that we look for reliability, with each other and with all of our senses. So this whole, oh, well, the cap didn't work, it's buggy, now it's not working. Those are going to go away as everything that's centralized talks to each other on the internet, and we're going to get something that's much more accurate and much more resilient.
We've had several comments that have come across both Twitter and YouTube, and we've touched upon it a little bit about security and privacy. And as we're walking the fine lines, we're talking about all of this, so that there's great benefits in sharing the information. But where do you find the balance?
I think that's what we're working on right now. I think that's the conversation that's taking place right now in Arlington County, in the United States, in Europe, across the globe. We're looking at what is the right balance between privacy and security. How much should the individual know? There's many applications I use that I know the device or the software coder knows a lot more about me than they're telling. A running app, for example, simple as that, should be able to tell when I'm injured because I'm not running as much, maybe I'm not as active, but they're not telling me that right now. And I think there's some apprehension around that, that creepy factor. They don't want to start to tell me things about me because then it lets on how much that system knows. But based upon the weather, which is, again, digital information, digitally available, all of that information pulled together, they can see, okay, this isn't just a weather effect. It wasn't just that it rained all that week. Sean looks like he's hurt. This would be a great time to recommend he go see a physical therapist, a chiropractor, a doctor, but we're not going to do that quite yet. So I think companies are trying to figure out what the right balance is. Consumers are trying to figure out what they're comfortable with, and we're slowly moving into that environment. But I think security is of utmost concern. I have yet to talk with a company that says, yeah, we're aware of it, but we're really not that worried about it. They think about it first and foremost. How do I keep this information secure at the same time letting the individual own that information and control that information?
We've had several questions that have come from our online audience, and I wanted to make sure that everybody who was here, if anyone had the opportunity, or had the opportunity to ask a question. So is anyone interested?
Yeah, hi, Phil Caron here. How do you see Arlington's digital destiny in the area of K through 12 public education?
So education is an area that I think is ripe for disruption, like every area is now. So I think there's a number of places, and actually I think Arlington County is doing a fabulous job at implementing digital information into that environment. And again, you're taking information that was already there, you're digitizing it, you're opening it up, and you're allowing it to be deployed in more effective ways. Something as simple as smart boards in classrooms allow parents access to what was happening in the classroom. And so they're able to go back and look at how a teacher taught something when there's questions during the homework. Something as simple as that improves the quality of the work that's taking place inside the homes, but it also, frankly, improves the relationship between student and parents because there's no longer this frustration of, that's not how my teacher was teaching me. we can now look it up and we can examine it. So there's the amount of information that parents have about what's taking place in the classroom is 100% improved because of what's happening in the digital space, whether it's using services like Blackboard, using smart boards. I think the environment we start to move into with K through 12 education is customized learning plans, where you're able to do adaptive testing that then determine if they understand the applications that they're learning, and you can adjust the learning plans and individualize the learning plans.
What about with respect to the ancient model of 25 kids in a classroom and one teacher?
Well, so I think that whole dynamic can start to change when you're starting to do customized learning plans. And I already see that taking place a little bit. My youngest son was in a classroom that had, when he was in first and second grade, it was multi-year. And then they were able to break their math groups out separately based upon how quickly they were learning. Some of that is still happening in a kind of physical analog way. Okay, he's accelerating faster, he's not accelerating as fast, let's put him in the appropriate group. And so you have these breakout groups then that are smaller in size. But I think ultimately digitization is about complete customization. Think of what happened with the music industry. We used to buy records that had 12 songs on them, and we had to play it from, for the most part, we played it from the first song to the last song. We might try to skip to it, and then digitization of the CD made that a little bit easier. We still bought all 12, but we were able to more easily and more quickly skip to the song we wanted to listen to. The streaming and broad digital deployment of that music genre has completely transitioned that. I mean, now we stream music, we build our own playlists, everything is completely customized. And I think education will move in that same direction, where you'll get very customized experiences. It will be more infused with digital than ever before, but if you walk into a classroom today, it is heavily digitized. They're on computers, they're using their phones, they're using other devices. My oldest son who's in middle school, uses his phone as the calculator. And the teacher encouraged us not to buy the high-end calculator that I grew up graphing on, but use a number of apps. And so they're becoming more accustomed to that. And what will happen is all of that information can be captured and fed back into the system. So are they running into a common problem in the same place, and can we address that? And so we are only today scratching the surface of what is capable. Ultimately, again, it gets to complete customization, where the teacher might be able to look at all of those students, whether it's 5 students or 25 students, and see what the common problems are, where they're slipping up, because everything becomes digitized. I mean, I can think back to doing mathematical proofs, and all the teacher got was everything at one glimpse. She got everything I wrote down. But if it's all digitally done, then she could look at that step by step by step, backing up through my work and seeing where I made the mistake. And parents will be able to do that. The kids will be able to do that. I also see kids moving into 3-dimensional space. And so I think the work of the future, 25 years from now, will be 3-dimensional. They're playing games in 3-dimensional space. They're using augmented reality and virtual reality. It's extremely comfortable for them to manipulate 3-dimensional environments. If you've ever seen kids play Minecraft, they have no problem navigating that environment in a 3-dimensional space. I look back when I learned geometry, even cones, spheres, it was all 2-dimensional. It was still 2-dimensional. We did it on paper. We did it out of books. All of that is becoming 3-dimensional space. And so students will be very, very comfortable operating, manipulating in 3-dimensional space. They'll code in 3-dimensional space. They'll do 3D printers where they print things in 3-dimensional space. They'll get very comfortable manipulating that environment.
Let's go to. Yes,
Thanks. So Sean, you talked early on about how digitization is going to help or is helping businesses decide where to put a coffee shop, where to put a restaurant. How about thinking of government, and how is digitization going to help the government, our county government, for example, decide where to put a fire station, where to put a library, where to put a community center, when to pave a street? And also, how can we use digitization to make our government more customer-friendly, more streamlined, and more efficient? Thank you.
So, looking at the first question, I think sensors will play a very large role in that, and the community will play a large role. You already see apps and cities that are working hand in hand. So, for example, my phone can tell today when I go over a pothole, and that information can be conveyed to the county and to the part of the county whose job it is to repair those. And so that information can be conveyed in real time. That cuts down on maybe going out and trying to find these or trying to figure out about them in a different way. And so the services are improved on both ends. The consumer has a quicker improvement of services, and the county is able to deploy those fixes, I think, more quickly and less expensively than maybe they have in the past. And that will take place in a number of different ways. We're seeing drones being used to examine bridges and do some of these other types of infrastructure checks. And so you're able to do that more quickly, more efficiently, more effectively, less expensively, and all of that ultimately benefits the residents of the community, but it also benefits the government. And you're going to see that happen in a number of different ways. I've seen drones being used in conjunction with lifeguards in beach settings. I know that doesn't impact Arlington County, but they'll fly out the life preserver and drop the life preserver if somebody's having a problem, and then the lifeguard will swim out there because the drone can get out there more quickly than the lifeguard can swim out there. So just simple things like that, little implementations of technology are going to change that. And then making that information more readily available and providing the resident with ultimate transparency. I think we still have a tremendous obstacle around discovery, searching and discovering, and we still do it in a very analog way, where we go to a box and we look for things kind of in a very traditional way. And I think that will start to evolve forward. Things will become more dynamic. So I'll have the information that's relevant to me. Already we're starting to see that. Certainly vocal computing, which I've talked a little bit about, will change that. So I will simply ask my computer or my Alexa or Google Assistant, hey, tell me X, pull up Y, send X to my phone, send Y to my tablet. Whatever that is. I need this document. I want to, voter registration in the future will be done with vocal computing. Register me to vote. Okay, what's your address? And we'll just do that all through voice commands. And so I think we'll see that the next interface for computing is definitely voice. We're already starting to see that take place. And I think that will change the way companies, or the way governments provide information and access to their residents. So with that in mind, governments need to ensure that they're optimizing that information for vocal computing environments. We're starting to see wide deployment of these technologies. So Arlington would be very forward-looking if they tied into something like Amazon's Alexa and allowed individuals to say, hey Alexa, ask Arlington County this. I can already get the weather, I can get other information, I can order an Uber, I can order pizza, I can set a timer in my kitchen. The counties that are most forward-looking will start to take advantage of these platforms and allow the residents to interact with them as if the entire county were sitting in that kitchen with them.
It's a great finishing point. Thank you very, very, very much. I don't know if you guys want to wrap up anything or ask any other questions.
Well, that was great tonight. We touched on a number of subjects, and we cut across a lot of them. This is the beginning of a journey to help define what it is we're trying. What are the real issues here? We're going to have discussions, I think, in the end of November, November 29th, on mobility, transit. What's that mean? Dennis Leach of our Department of Transportation is going to be leading it with the head of NIST's Smart Cities program, and they're going to engage in that discussion. We hope to follow that with an issue, a session on wellness, one on learning. What does that mean in this world? Community itself, place. And so we'll be doing this over the next 6 months to 9 months, and hopefully we've got a better understanding, a communication of what's possible. And I guess our massively transformative proposal is we want to realize the possible. What is possible here in Arlington County? This is a community that does not do the easy, as you know. It takes on these difficulties and it comes up with an answer. And I think that involving you in this, we have no predetermined answers, but we wanted to begin this with this conversation tonight. So thank you all for coming.
And as Jack was saying, we hope to see you. So November 29th, discussion on mobility at the AUSA building at 7 o'clock is our next one. There were several comments we didn't get to. One was, hey, how can I record this? So I think that's a good thing for us to try to record the questions of people who didn't ask something, that there are some ideas that someone might be coming up with that they didn't think of that we should look at trying to incorporate into what we're doing. But I thank you, Sean. I thank you, Jack and Alexandra. I hope you all enjoyed yourself.
And our guests, thank you.
And yes, Victor, Cheryl, and Raven, thank you.
Good job.